Okay.
Alrighty, hi, I'm Miss Nicoletti, and today I'm going to talk to you about art. So who in here has ever taken some kind of art class, doesn't matter what grade? Okay, pretty much everybody. Alright, well, we're not going to talk about art class today, but we are going to talk about how you can still incorporate those exact same ideas in an art class in other subjects. So first, there are bins on most of the tables. I want you guys to pick 3 different colors from the bin. It can be markers or crayons, it doesn't matter which.
Each person? What? Each person have 3 colors?
Yes, each person has 3 different colors.
Can they use crayons or do they have to be markers? Ryan, you can use crayons, she said.
I like this. You guys are not taking colors. You guys are start coloring?
This is literally me today, though. I'm holding this on stage. It's like something. Yeah, here's like here's my darkness and my in between. This is just like kind of obsessed. It's a I like that. It's good, bro. Fingers that. Make sure it's that angry. Yes. Oh, is this a stress thing? Like the de-stress?
Professor Medina, do you guys
don't have to take
Pardon?
do you need crayons?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I'm handing out these little coloring squares, and the one I put in front of you is not the one that you have to take, but I want you guys to pick just one of them, any one of them.
Did you start coloring?
Yes, you guys can start coloring. I'm going to give you about 5 to 6 minutes to color your square as much as you can. It's okay if you don't get the whole thing done. Just as long as you guys are coloring.
No markers.
You guys do not have to use sorry.
Brown, black, and white.
Yes.
It's already white.
So yeah, you guys can go ahead and start coloring.
You need a bigger color.
I want a picture.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
We have an extra.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully this is a little bit of a de-stressor before we all get to finals as well, so.
Oh, heck yes. Feeling it. Waiting for a big people. It's good for time. That's a giant coloring book at home. Do you have those like adult coloring books? I would rather use the cartoon coloring books. Honestly.
Me too. The $1 ones, the Dollar Tree,
Yeah.
are great of like Sesame Street and stuff.
Yes, because the big adult ones, it's like frustrating because you can't color them.
They're so tiny. I don't know.
That's me right now. Me too. Stay in this one.
What colors did you go with?
Yeah,
I went with purple, green,
Can we use more than 3 colors?
Just 3.
Less than 3? Can we use less than 3?
Yes, you can use less than 3. Maximum 3.
I was debating it.
Just taking my black marker and just going over the page.
You too, though. Use black, gray, and brown.
I almost
Let me see what you're coloring.
Oh no, I changed
You
colors.
changed it.
I was going to use the black, gray, and brown, but let's try and change my mood.
Like one of those cross. More colors. Literally, is it bigger? I was listening to
I actually didn't like our car already. Yeah, she's gonna be like.
Just fair warning, you guys have about 3 minutes
Oh, it's a
left.
fish! It's a fish!
Oh my god. I know.
Wait, you
It's a fish.
You do not have to complete the whole thing, just as much as you can get done would be great.
What do I?
Rage
I just realized there's a bunch of them.
Well, they're very engaged.
I don't know what this is.
Even college students can get engaged with coloring, that's amazing.
This is what we do in my children's lit class. We do a lot of activities, and they love to color.
We don't see.
I love that too, honestly. I love that senior year of high school, just doing the small activities.
I'm just thinking about
Like if you don't love to color, you're part of the
I like the ring ring.
Oh, it is definitely. Yeah, where he shares all his skills with everyone else.
I thought they were all sick, but they're not. This one's
No, that's what he said. Like, my sisters used to watch that so much.
I was gonna say, I was like,
Yeah, no, I never watched the show.
Really? We always watched it.
I found it. I see it now. There's a fish here. And I don't know if this is what. No, I didn't know this one.
It's literally what I noticed I picked up.
Okay, you also have a hanger fish. I have like. I don't know what this is.
Are you guys finding it hard to be limited to just 3 colors? Or does it work better for some people? Some people like just having 3 colors? Is it hard overall?
Yes.
Okay.
I put up one.
Done, okay, that's so bad.
That's great. We'll figure out what it's going to be.
So you can just like go through the list and stuff.
Yeah, what's up in Bumblebee's
I do more.
Well, you're watching that.
You guys have 1 minute left.
Crap.
That's
Rage color.
Rage color.
You're not supposed to be raging, Blakely.
Rage.
We probably look
Great.
You're done with
Even if you don't get it done, it's okay. It's as much as you can.
Can I stress you? You can't not.
It should be your list.
Yeah, because this is your entire lesson. How to color 101.
20 seconds.
I'm not real close.
You can't not.
Alrighty, I would like all of you guys to close your markers and put your crayons down. Stop coloring. Great. Alrighty, as I was walking around, all of you guys did an amazing job. Everybody got a good portion of their squares colored. That's great. What I want you guys to do now, though, is I want you to look at your neighbor's square. Just glance. You don't have to study it too hard. Do you guys notice any differences? Just think in your head. Do you notice the colors are different? Maybe they have a different square? Are there any big differences? Do you guys want to share some of those differences that you see?
Mine has a lot of red and yellow, and Gabby's has blue.
Okay, awesome. So you guys chose different colors. That's great. Anybody else have differences? Blakely?
Mine was messy and messy. That's very neat.
So messy and neat, that's good. That's good that you noticed.
Gabby kind of worked from the inside out where I worked from the bottom up.
That is a great thing to notice. That is a really good observation, just where you guys started. Anybody else have any differences that they noticed? Mr. Astic? Yeah.
You guys had like entire thing covered, and then I just got some of my little seaweed.
Just a little portion?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's good. How much you guys got done? Those are great differences. I'm really glad you guys noticed this, actually. Well, that's actually going to lead me into what I want to talk about. So why did I have you guys do an extremely simple project? Because we all are college students, and I had to color a little square. Well, I had to do this because even though it seemed very simple and easy, it was creative. You guys all chose different colors, and even though I may have placed a square in front of you, you guys still all have a different square. I'm pretty sure nobody really has the same square that they're sitting next to. So, and I also gave you some constraints, which for some of you guys might have been stressful because there was time and there was color. You could only have up to 3 colors. You could have less than that, but you were only allowed to use up to 3 colors. So when you're thinking about that in a classroom, what projects you give, you have to consider some of the things some of the constraints and freedoms that you're going to give your students, which I'm going to go into more depth later. But I also am going to talk about how you can incorporate just the general idea of projects into every subject. You may not think it, but art can be in every subject. And who really benefits from projects like these? Simple, hard, art overall, who is benefiting from doing these projects? So, no matter what subject you're teaching and how you hopefully plan to incorporate art into your lesson, you have to remember a few things. You really need to keep in mind who you're teaching. So I know a lot of us, some of us are early childhood, some of us are middle childhood, and then we're AYA, but you really have to think, what is your classroom? You know, is it the ratio, boys to girls, ethnicity, culture, things like that. You have to keep in mind who you're targeting with this art project and how it's going to benefit all of your students together. What do you want the students to take away from this art project? So, like I said, this was a very simple project that I just gave you, but I'm hoping that you guys, in the end, will take away the connection between a simple project and how that can benefit you in any classroom. That's the connection that you also need to think about when giving any student an art lesson or an art project. Is it a group project or an individual project? In this case, this was an individual project, but I could have had you guys work in groups and color the square together, which probably would have been a little bit harder. And can you give your students any freedom? This was an extremely important part to me in Rafe's Teach Like Your Hair's on Fire that he kind of touched on. He said whether your kids are giving an elaborate concert or putting on the tiniest of skits, we adults need to get the hell out of the students' way. I let you guys pick what color markers you want. Even though you can only pick 3, you guys got to pick the colors. And this said something about you. This said what colors you prefer to work with, what colors you may like, what colors you thought would work best for that picture. So that was a freedom I gave you. And even though it didn't seem like a big one, it actually was. Because like I said, it said something about who you are as a person. And it was showing me who you are. You know, if you worked from the inside out, or if you could only get a small space done, that means you were meticulous and you only wanted to work with a small space. Giving your students a choice, even if it's simple, allows them the freedom to express themselves. As I will discuss later, again, more in depth, this is a very important part of all classrooms because it's easy for teachers to forget who the projects are really for. Alrighty, so this is just a few different ways you can incorporate art into history and English and then math and science. So with history and English, you can think about like books. If you're reading a book, you can make a comic strip. I remember personally in my English class, we read To Kill a Mockingbird and then we made a comic strip about the main points about it. You can do a poem, you can have your students read a poem and then draw what they got from that poem or how they interpreted the poem. If you're doing history, there's time periods. You know, you can have them create, if you're learning about World War II, the big events from that, and just draw out a scene or create a diorama, things like that. Now with math and science, it might seem a little bit harder because you might not necessarily think art in math and science or projects, but change those words to models or representations, and that might seem a little bit easier to connect that with math and science. So Rafe had his students attempt to create their own version of a modern Mondrian painting, which many of you guys might have seen. Has anybody seen that before, that painting?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It seems really simple, right? We would go, oh, it's just a bunch of squares and lines and, you know, a few colors thrown in. But once he had his students, he just told his students, try and copy that. It was actually extremely difficult for his students because those lines are so straight and those squares are sizes that you really have to think about. That was a pattern that really had to be thought out and planned. And his students had such a hard time. It was actually surprising to read. And the students, they just couldn't until he showed them how to use the ruler with the lines and how to measure out the squares and to make sure that the line width was a good width to copy throughout that pattern. In science, you can do models such as like if you're learning the solar system. That is a great way to let students express themselves. I remember I had to make the solar system and I actually had fun with that because you can kind of like differ the colors a little bit. You know, I mean, you have the restriction of science, solar system, but you get your freedom in the colors you pick or how big you may make the planets, things, or how you may organize it, things like that. Alrighty, so I really want to dig deep, a little bit deeper, into Rafe and Chapter 9, Art Lover. The biggest thing I took away from this was the value of art in a classroom. One of the main this is where I felt like Rafe touched on earlier when he said teachers needed to give a project and take a step back. The projects are given for students to show off their talents and what they've taken away from the lesson. And I feel like that is really hard sometimes for teachers to remember because a teacher gives a project and they have restrictions that they need to grade it by, which is completely understandable, but you also have to remember you're letting the students do what they need to do to remember that piece of information. So later when you may give a test or when they have an exam or even if it's later for a state standardized test, they need to remember that piece of information and they need to enjoy themselves and know, hey, I got to use these colors or I got to, you know, make it glittery or things like that. Simple things that can connect with them to what they learned. Children of any age want nothing more than to say who they are. They just want to express themselves. And I know that we've all observed classrooms, and I have a feeling a good amount of us have seen just how effective hands-on projects can be when students just want to create something. Even if it's folding a piece of paper in the elementary, or if it's drawing out their name at the middle school level. We all saw that they really engaged themselves in this. You guys just engaged yourselves in a square because it was fun and because it was relaxing and you knew that you got to pick out what colors you wanted and how you wanted it to look, which I think is really important. Rafe said artists create because of the need to express themselves, which is extremely true. Artists aren't creating because they have guidelines or for somebody else. Most artists, a good amount of artists, create because that's the way they can put themselves on a piece of paper or into a sculpture, or even when they're drawing out a map, it's still them inside of there at some point. Rafe also said we create for the same reason we breathe. We need to. We need to create because we want to show ourselves off. We want to show our talents. Rafe had a student who was extremely gifted musically. She was in an orchestra and she was so great, and she was invited to play by herself on stage, but the school deemed it necessary to have a professional orchestra play behind her because by herself they didn't see that she was enough. They wanted more, and it held her back, and Rafe was extremely enraged by that. He pointed out that, you know, they were getting in the way of her talents. They were getting in the way of her showing who she was. Even though she was great, she just wasn't enough. And that is something that teachers should never forget in a classroom, that your students, even though their work, you may not have them be doing a big project, that's still them. Whatever project you give them, they are putting themselves into that. And I think that's a really big thing that everybody should remember. And who benefits from the projects also goes along with this. The students are the ones that are taking away from these projects. They will remember this. They will remember the teacher that had them create the solar system. I remember when I created the comic strip for the book I really liked. You will remember that project and connect it to what you were learning. And it's really quick and easy to do that. It's not very hard to incorporate art into any subject. So to conclude my lesson, I actually just want to have everybody pair up or just turn to your neighbor and think about everything that I talked about. And I want you and your partner to choose one of the classrooms that I have listed up here. I have 4 different classrooms from different grade levels. Hopefully that gives you some variety on what your preference is. And I want you guys to take out a piece of paper and write down what class you picked and what project, what art project you would give those students in that classroom. You can, so I want you to write down what class you picked, what project you would give for that classroom, and a brief description on how they would connect, how the art project connects to that class and the lesson. Okay. So you guys can have about 3-4 minutes to do that.
Like situations. If it was sunny out, we would draw like ourselves in like bathing suits, and it would like be published in the newspaper. So like, just
You're doing good. 20 minutes.
okay, pick the weather they're out like today. Go pick your drawing and put it on your test. And they're still like published like even like latest like ever. It's so crazy. Third grade weather.
Basically,
You guys picked third grade too?
yeah.
Wow. All right.
Should we?
Did everybody pick one?
No, pick whatever you want. You do not have to pick something. I just wanted to gauge and see where everybody was at.
I know, that's like a big thing.
Yeah.
When you're done discussing it and writing it down with your partner, if you could just put your markers down or pencils down or whatever, just so I know that you're done. Unless you're coloring your square, then that's okay too. I know everybody was dying to finish that square.
I don't know. That's what
Sunny. I went across the narrator, so I didn't remember the cool part. I was just like reading like big water.
That'd be heavy.
I know, you probably would have worn that in the summer. I'm trying to think like a sun hat, but it didn't really work out well.
Got about 10 Oh, there's always one. Jordan. There's always one.
Are they younger or did you expect anyone?
I used to have little kids, they would get them.
I saw that in the elementary. They would do that the minute they got markers.
It shows a sign of creativity.
All right, if you're done, can you just raise your hand real quick just so I can see? Anybody still feels like they need more time? One more time. Alrighty. So, everybody's done. Alrighty. Who picked the third grade class? Raise your hand. I did this on purpose because I knew that was the one that the majority of the class would pick. I assumed that you guys would pick that one because, will you admit that it's easier to come up with a project in the third grade for that topic? You could come up with 1,000 things for weather, right?
Yeah.
Do you guys want to share some of the projects you picked? Did you have your hand up first, Allison?
Yeah, but I also did one for the 7th grade.
Oh, awesome. Okay, sweet. What'd you put?
I just like a weathermobile.
Okay,
Oh.
that's good. That's cute. I like that.
I said you could draw the weekly weather report, like Monday to Friday.
That's a good one. I really like that. Essence, what you did?
In my elementary school, we drew like if it was like gonna be sunny or like raining, then we drew like a scenario of like people like in the weather, and then it was published in our newspaper.
Oh, cute.
So, that's
I remember that. I remember that.
I like that idea.
We're gonna have like boxes, and so when we're gonna have someone check the weather outside, they're gonna put like a chip in the box so that they can see like how many days of sun do we have, how many cloudy days, how many snowy days, how many rainy days.
That's a really good one too. That way they're really tracking it. I like how you guys saw that the students can really track the weather. That's a really good idea.
We did the water cycle.
The water cycle. That's good. I like that one. I remember doing that one in elementary. Anybody else want to share? Blakely.
Cassie actually did a photosynthesis skit when she was in elementary school. She got to dress as a raindrop.
Costume. That's so cute.
We put that down.
I did that.
It'd be so fun.
And that's so cute that you got to connect with your classmates like that too. That's so nice that you guys all work together like that. A lot of your guys' projects were extremely good projects. Those can really help younger age students draw out the pictures and track the weather. I mean, I know now I personally track the weather because, you know, for driving purposes, but it's really nice to start kids on that earlier so they can see how important that is to look at what the weather's going to be like that day. So as I said, I had a feeling that a lot of you were going to pick the 3rd grade because it's easier. It's easy. With that subject, you can do 1,000 different projects on the weather, skits, you know, boxes, drawing out the weekday weather, things like that. But I think also, again, it's not your guys' fault. I am not shaming anybody for picking the 3rd grade. That is very great. But I noticed that none of you guys picked 11th, 10th, or 7th. I think Allison said she only picked the 7th grade. See, and that is something where I feel like when I said that you can change the words project and art to models and representations, that's where that really comes into play. I still have a hard time with chemical bonds, but I remember when I got to build my own molecule, it really helped me to see, you know, where the protons and neutrons and electrons all went and how many there were and what that molecule really was. 10th grade English, reading The Great Gatsby. You know, there are a lot of projects you could actually do with that. I know that some of you probably read the book and watched the movie. Did anybody do that where they did both or just at least one? Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, I mean, you could have your students do a skit like you did with the... I can't remember what you did actually. Photosynthesis, there we go. You did the photosynthesis. You could have your kids put on a skit and dress up, and that is still a project. That is still something that they have to plan out, maybe draw out, and act out, and that is still a part of art. For the 7th grade history class discussing American colonization, that one was a little long and probably a little bit more difficult. Did everybody find that pretty hard to like associate? Allison, did you want to say something? I feel like
I was just going to say what I got the idea.
No, go ahead, please. I'm so sorry. I forgot to ask you about that.
No, it's okay. Well, you could have them make like the houses that Americans like would have made when they were colonizing.
Yeah.
And like you could have had them only use like material that they would have had in like the old days, like toothpicks for like wood and like stuff like that.
No, that is really great. And see, that is an extremely good idea, but one that probably not a lot of people would consider, not a lot of teachers would consider. Because it is hard. It's really hard when you're taking history, and yeah, you may have pictures in a book, but to have your students draw out their own version or to draw out what they took away from that lesson, that's where they can have the freedoms and the freedom to express themselves, and also to show you as a teacher how well you taught them, honestly, how much you were able to put into their minds about that lesson. So I'm really glad you guys came up with so many for the 3rd grade though. That was amazing. You guys all came up with great projects, but just don't ever forget that art can be in a lot of different subjects. So I really hope that you guys took something away from this and can see just where art can be placed in a bunch of subjects.
I think most people would admit